The reason that growth in Chicago is faster than it is in St. Louis is due to things that I think we would find to be desirable. So it's going to be, you know, their labor force participation rate is staying up higher while ours is dropping. You know, their hours worked hasn't dropped as much as it has here, and productivity has been a bit faster. If we could get those kind of things turned around, to get an extra percentage point of growth from that standpoint is a really positive thing. It means that wages are going to be growing faster, incomes are going to be going up, and overall well-being could be positive. When you look at a place like Indianapolis, on the other hand, same growth rate as Chicago, but really what they're getting their growth from is just more people in the area. So they're actually seeing negative productivity growth overall. So this could be industry mix changing, people working, you know, in lower wage jobs, for example, things like that, that can be driving it. But it's really driven by population growth. So I think, you know, I'd rather be on the Chicago level than on the Indianapolis level, because those are really the positives that we look for overall well-being. So I always kind of break this out this way, so it kind of gives us a good perspective on what to look for. And to make the point, I think we talk a lot about population, right? You know, the region's population's been stagnant, hasn't been growing a lot. And that can be okay. If we can find ways for overall, you know, to get more capital stock into the region and better paying jobs for the people that are here, and you can educate your workforce, you can kind of keep the population the same, and everybody can be better off. I don't think anybody wants to have a lot of traffic congestion on their way to work every single day. I mean, that's not a positive thing. So there are ways that you can kind of get this growth with maybe slow population growth that's steady and sustainable. And that's kind of the desirable outcome that we really want to look for when we break this down. Okay, so what does this all tell us about the outlook for the region? I'm going to use some fancy charts here, and I'll take a minute to explain it. But basically what I want to do is take these different components and then look at a whole bunch of different indicators to get an idea of where they currently are and if they tell us anything about, you know, what the future population growth looks like or productivity growth and things like that. So what I'm going to do is use these spider charts. So I'm just going to take 1 minute to explain how these things work. In short, I'll take a bunch of different indicators, I'll normalize them so that they all kind of have the same scaling, and then I'll plot them all around the outside. So indicator A, B, C, D, and E. If you look at indicator A, anything that's, so we're going to be in the red area here. Our peer cities are going to be more or less the cities I showed you earlier on, and then the average is going to be for the whole U.S. Anytime that those red lines are inside of that circle, that would mean that our growth rates are less positive or not as good, so to speak, as kind of a national indicator would be. And then again, same thing for indicator C, and then indicator E over here. So that's kind of how you read this chart. So you want to see the red line kind of all the way to the outside. That would be an indication that these numbers are looking good. When the numbers are in the inside, it means we're lagging behind either national averages or peer averages here. Okay? Everybody with me? Cool. There's the spider. I thank our assistant for that one. He decided that was worth adding on here. Okay, so let's take population growth and say, like, well, is it possible that we can get population growth in the region, and that's what's going to boost growth in the region? And I would say that when you look at kind of a handful of indicators here, from like natural change in our population just due to birth rates, that doesn't look very good. If you look at our migration numbers, those aren't positive. International migration, our share of foreign born in the region is very small, which is probably the best predictor of what foreign immigration is going to look like in the future. The only place that maybe we're kind of moving a little bit closer to the national average is the number of kids that we have. So the number of kids in the region tends to be closer to the national average than, say, the average age of the population. But for the most part, every indicator that we have for the St. Louis region on population is slower than growth is slower than the national average. When you look at the workforce indicators, the one place that we do have a bright spot is this employment to population ratio. So when you look at the overall population, there are more people, the share of the population that's working does tend to be higher. And that's kind of consistent with some of these relatively really low unemployment rates for the region. So that is the one bright spot. But when you look at a lot of these other indicators, for example, disability rates are a lot higher than the national average is. Number of children with disabilities, adults with disabilities, these are people who are probably not going to be working. And so those numbers tend to be very high, which is why they're pushed to the inside. One place that we are on the positive is disconnected youth. So this is going to be people, or youth aged kind of 16 to 21 that are either not in school and they're not working. So that share is relatively low. So that is a positive indicator for the region. For the most part, I mean, we're still kind of clustered in this middle. So I don't expect to see that natural population growth is going to kind of shift anytime soon. Kind of turning to the next component, productivity growth. This is where I think we do have some really positive things going on in the region. We have great schools. We have kids that are going to school and showing up, teachers that show up to school. On every indicator here, we're pretty much at the national average, and in a few places, we're actually above the national average. So this does suggest that we can get a lot of gains from productivity growth as a way to boost the region with just the same number of people. So those numbers are very positive. And then when we look at the physical capital numbers, again, transportation times are very low, so that allows us to be more productive in our commutes to work. Interstate system is great, so that's been very good. Trucking reliability index, it's not consistent with the other two indicators. I'm kind of confused as to why that number is what it is. I would expect it to be pushed out a little bit more. But I would say, generally speaking, we have great physical infrastructure in the region, particularly when it comes to highways and roads from the transportation and logistics side of things. And if you look around kind of what's happened in the St. Louis region over the last kind of 5 to 10 years, we have seen a real boom in logistics and shipping in the region, and that has been a big positive. Startup rates are relatively low overall. And patents and venture capital money really hasn't flown into this region. We see a lot of startup firms in the St. Louis area that they actually end up moving out west to attract capital. And St. Louis-based venture capital firms also go out west to find investments. So if a St. Louis-based venture capital firm wants to meet a St. Louis-based startup, they got to go out to California and find each other. And that's a problem for the region. But I think we're making some good progress on those. So I do think we have some really positives on our physical capital stock. We just got to find ways to better retain these workers. The place I think where we have the greatest potential, and you kind of started this already a little bit here, is our disparity measures tend to be much, much worse than national averages. So if you look at, for example, disparities in the unemployment rate, disparities in homicides, disabilities, this is where we're ultimately going to be able to find more people to show up and work. If you can change kind of this pool of workers that we have, because it's not growing, there's not a lot of indication that it is going to grow, so we have to find the people who are disconnected from the labor force for one reason or another and figure out what we need to do to attract them to work. Because without that, there's just not a whole lot of opportunity to get more people into the pie here. And these things go all the way through. The one place that we do have some pretty good numbers is on education. So we have done a pretty good job of kind of getting college graduation rates and high school graduation rates up for minority and disadvantaged populations. But pushing those people into the workforce in a lot of different ways still hasn't happened the way that we need to. So this is really, I think, one of the keys to longer-term growth in the region is getting this part of our population back into the labor force, at least to where it's closer to the national average numbers. Okay, so just kind of wrapping up here, some main thoughts. Overall, the pace of growth is very different from one to the next. So yeah, San Jose growth looks more like China's growth than it does kind of St. Louis's growth. And that's been stable for a long period of time. So we don't have to look very far to see a place that's been growing at 7% year over year. And we actually have good data on San Jose to prove that that's the case. Decomposing growth can kind of help explain what's generating growth in different places. So take Portland, Oregon, and St. Louis, for example. They both are growing about 1% a year, Portland's growth is pretty much coming all from domestic migration. So you're just dumping a lot more people onto a fixed number of resources. And in St. Louis, we're seeing pretty much the opposite. So fewer people, but more gains in productivity. But the final numbers turn out about the same. So those pose completely different challenges to how to accelerate growth and how to handle the problems that are caused by it. And kind of the last piece here is going to be, this knowledge economy, the share of of our workers that have a college degree. It's been positively correlated with domestic migration rates for a long time and productivity growth. So anything that we can do to try to find ways to boost educational attainment in the region is going to ultimately boost productivity and in the long term, maybe not turn domestic migration positive, but at least stem the flow of people leaving the region because there'll be additional opportunities. And then, like I said before, really ability to reduce the disparities and find ways to retain youth to this region. So if anybody has kids, do everything you possibly can to get them to come back home. Offer free rent, whatever you need to do. Help them find a job, and then once they have kids, they're never going to want to leave anyways because they need the free babysitting. So do whatever you can do to really help, keep those people around the region, because that's the only way that we're actually going to see those population numbers turn around. So with that, just want to plug all of our publications are free. Tim used a whole bunch of Fred graphs, so all of that data from the St. Louis Fed's also free. You can go onto our website and pull these reports and general commentary down. So that's something to kind of keep an eye out, and we'll send the slides out. So with that, thank you very much.
Again, thank you. Have a wonderful day. Be safe.
Thank you.